So now you're moving towards the promised land, let's say. So that's inspiring, and that produces positive emotion, because you experience positive emotion when you see yourself moving towards a valued goal. No valued goal, no positive emotion. That's how your systems are set up psychophysiologically. On the negative front, well, maybe anger, bitterness, and fear stop you. Okay, so what do you do with them? Take good stock of your sinful nature, let's say. You know what temptations you're prone to and what knock you off the beaten track, and maybe you feel guilty about it. You know where your weaknesses are, and you probably have some idea of just what kind of hell you could inhabit if you let those weaknesses get the upper hand. So why don't you just write about that for 15 minutes? So let's say this isn't what you could have in 5 years. It's the pit you could dig for yourself if you decided to, just sit there or dig. Everyone has a sense of that, for some people. My temptation probably would have been alcohol. It calmed me in social situations. It made me feel a closer kinship to people, and it was a pretty good stimulant. And so it was a really good drug for me, and I enjoyed it quite a lot, too much. But I learned that I had better things to do. I wouldn't have stopped without better things to do. And what
did you mean by better things to do?
Well, I was writing my book, Maps of Meaning, when I was still carousing as a graduate student. I'd started to put my life together by that point quite a bit, but I was still a party animal and very social. But I found that I couldn't think hungover. And not only that, I couldn't handle the emotional tension of what I was dealing with intellectually. It was too, because if you're hungover, your emotions are more sensitive, especially your anxiety. And the work I was doing was way too demanding emotionally, because I was dealing with historical atrocity, and the motivations for that was just too damn dark, to be dealing with hungover. Plus, once I had written a fair bit and was editing, once you've edited your work to a substantial degree, you have to use finer and finer gradations of judgment to continue to improve it. And if you're fuzzy-minded at all, if you've impaired your judgment, when you edit, you can make it worse, not better. And then I also realized that the only times I really regretted my actions was when I was drinking, because it disinhibits you, and that's fun. That can be really fun. But I'd wake up the next day and think, yeah, I was a little too provocative. I was a little too aggressive. I was a little too mean-spirited in my wit, a little too egotistical, or maybe more than a little on all of those fronts. A little careless in my choice of partner, a little uncontrolled in my social behavior in places I shouldn't have been, because I was starting to, I was a graduate student and a teacher by that point, and I was interacting with professors, say, in the social milieu.
Responsibility grew.
Yeah, well, it wasn't the time to be drunk. That just wasn't good. That worked in northern Alberta to some degree in some subcultures, but in those situations, it just made me look like a fool. Well, it made me into a fool, not just look like one. And then when you and I got married, I didn't, and we were going to have kids. I thought, well, I'm not drinking when I have kids.
Yeah, I wanted children.
Yeah, and you want to grow up at that point. And besides, I was ready to dispense with all of that by then. In any case, so you can imagine the hell you could inhabit. And then the advantage to that is, people are often afraid of moving forward, and no wonder. But you should be way more afraid of not moving forward. And so if you get that hell behind you, it's like, well, do I want to go there? Well, I don't have the effort or the energy. I'm not even sure that it's the right thing. It's like, well, do I want to go back there? It's like, no, definitely not that. And if you don't feel that, hell, then you're not nearly as motivated as you could be. Because if you have any sense of just exactly how bloody dismal and dark things could get, then, and that's right there for you. And that was one thing that...
I thought it was helpful. I thought it was helpful when I did the future authoring to think about where I would go if I went to the wrong place.
Why?
Well, it's just good to know how you will fall apart.
Yeah, well,
and it's possible.
And you can also ask yourself, and studying historical atrocity also helped me with that. It's like, well, do you want to be a what would you call a sadist? You're bitter and resentful. You want to hurt other people? Is that where you want to end up? You want to lie and deceive? Because that's where you end up if you lie and deceive. You want to be resentful and bitter? Because that's where you end up if you're resentful and bitter.
Yeah, but sometimes, you know, people, they just don't know what to do about it. So your program helps them to make a plan.
Yeah, well, and the plan is really, look, we're visionaries, man. Human beings are visionaries. Really.
Well, I found when I did the self-authoring, the 15 minutes of writing that I did, the dreaming I did, when I wrote about my future and just dreamed of what it could be like if it was just what I wanted.
Yeah.
And then outlined the goals, because you outline goals after that in the future authoring. Those things that I had identified appeared in my life. Those. Yeah, well. And that was quite shocking.
Well, the thing is, you look at the world through a goal-directed framework. And so when you switch your goals, what appears to you in the world switches. It's mystical in a sense, but in another sense, it's just understandable. It's like, well, if I look that way, I see the TV and the couch, and if I look this way, I see you in the chair. Well, that's not that mysterious, but what I've done is I've changed the reality that manifests itself to me just by changing the direction of my orientation. Well, we do that metaphysically as well. And so, for example, if you decide that you're going to be courageously trusting towards people when they offer you an opportunity, even though you're skeptical and timid, but you decide, no, I'm going to have some faith in people, so I'm going to be courageous and trusting, then when they open a door to you that's an opportunity, you'll think, oh, that's a door I could walk through, instead of thinking I'm moving into a trap. And it's the same reality in some sense, but the way that you're interacting with it changes. Well, it can change. It can invert. It can change so radically that it barely looks like you're living in the same world. There are a lot of potential interpretations that you can validly lay on the world. And some of them are extremely positive, and they still work. And wouldn't that be lovely if you could lay an incredibly positive vision on the world in a calculating and strategic manner, not an instrumental manner, right? Because you're aiming at something genuinely good, and that would work. And that is how the world works. One of the things I loved about my clinical practice, I loved this. It was so good, and I miss it. We were always working. The best parts of me and my client were working together to make everything about their lives better. And it worked. You know, like I had lots of female clients who tripled their income in 4 years. They didn't even think that was possible. It's like, well, I don't make enough money. I'm barely making ends meet, single mothers. I have no idea what to do. I don't like my job. It's like, well, let's make a plan here. You know, what do you want? Well, I'd like to make this much money. Why don't we double that? And just, because you're going to aim at something. Some people do make more money than that, so maybe it could be you. Well, is that even possible? It's not even possible. It's like, well, let's just assume that maybe it's possible and see what you'd have to do. Well, you got to get your CV together. Well, it's full of holes. Okay, well, let's fix the holes. Okay, now you got to get a plan. Well, I'm not very good at interviews. Okay, let's practice interviewing till you're not just good at it, you're looking forward to it. You know, I had clients who were in such dire situations that all I could do was really help buffer them against that. But they were a minority. I wouldn't say more than 5% of my practice fell into that category. Everyone else, it was like just rapid improvement on all fronts, you know. And that's such fun. And there isn't anything more practical. This is the thing, too. There is nothing more practical than developing a vision. It's not some pie-in-the-sky exercise. Without a vision, you're chaotic and fragmented and hopeless and disappointed, and someone can stop you just by putting up a single obstacle. You're a house divided amongst itself. You have no forward movement. You're not enthusiastic, and that's to be filled with the Spirit of God, by the way. And your life is a sequence of disappointments and frustrations and tragedies, and you're a leaf blowing in the wind. And that is not what you're called to be. That's not what you're called to be. You're called to be a visionary constructor of the paradisal vision. Mm-hmm. Really? Really? That's who you are. Terrible as that is to apprehend. And so...
Well, what do we have to lose?
We already will lose everything we have to lose.
Yeah.
Right? We're all in this game, man. So there's, whether you want it to be this way or not, you are betting everything on your life.
The next best predictor of lifetime success is conscientiousness. Well, so, and of the two aspects of conscientiousness, say orderliness and industriousness, the better predictor is industriousness. So the question is, well, what can you do about your industriousness? And the answer to that is, well, that's kind of rough too, because there's a strong genetic component. But you can work on micro habits with regards to your conscientiousness. And I think the best micro habits, this is partly to do with this future authoring program processes, I think the best thing you can do with regards to your conscientiousness is to set up some aims for yourself, goals that you actually value. And the future authoring program helps people do that. And basically it does a situational analysis of, it helps you do a situational analysis of your life more than a psychological analysis, I would say. And so the questions are something like, well, all right, you're going to have to put some effort into your life. And you need to be motivated to do that. And so what are the potential sources of motivation? Well, you could think about them in the big five manner. You know, if you're extroverted, you want friends. If you're agreeable, you want an intimate relationship. If you're disagreeable, you want to win competitions. If you're open, you want to engage in creative activity. If you're high in neuroticism, you want security. Okay, so those are all sources of potential motivation that you could draw on, that you could tailor to your own, you know, your own personality. But then there are dimensions that you want to consider your life across. And so we ask people about, well, you know, if you could have your life the way you wanted it in 3 to 5 years, if you were taking care of yourself properly, you know, what would you want from your friendships? What would you want from your intimate relationship? How would you like to structure your family? What do you want for your career? Well, how are you going to use your time outside of your job? And how are you going to regulate your mental and physical health, and maybe also your drug and alcohol use? Because that's a good place to auger down, you know, because alcoholism, for example, wipes out, you know, 5 to 10% of people. So you want to keep that under control. And then so maybe, you know, you develop a vision of what you would like your life to be, and that associates the goal. Well, once the goal is established, and then you break down the goal into micro processes that you can implement, the micro processes become rewarding in proportion in relation to their causal association with the goal, and that tangles in your incentive reward system. You know, we talked about the dopaminergic incentive reward system, and that's the thing that keeps you moving forward. And the way it works is that it works better if it produces positive emotion when it can see you moving towards a valued goal. Okay, well, what's the implication of that? Better have a valued goal, because otherwise you can't get any positive motivation working out. And so the more valuable the goal, in principle, the more the micro processes associated with that goal start to take on a positive charge. And so what that means is, well, you get up in the morning and you're excited about the day, you're ready to go. And so as far as I can tell, what you do is you specify your long-term ideal. Maybe you also specify a place you want to stay the hell away from, so that you're terrified to fail as well as excited about succeeding, because that's also useful. You specify your goal. You do that in some sense as a unique individual. You want to specify goals that make you say, oh, if that could happen as a consequence of my efforts, it would clearly be worthwhile. Because the question always is, why do something? Because doing nothing is easy. You just sit there and you don't do anything. That's real easy. The question is, why would you ever do anything? And the answer to that has to be because you've determined by some means that it's worthwhile. And then the next question might be, well, where should you look for worthwhile things? And one would be, well, you could consult your own temperament. And the other would be, well, you kind of look at what it is that people accrue that's valuable across the lifespan. So you do a structural analysis of the subcomponents of human existence, and I already did that. You need a family, you need friends. Like, you don't need to have all these things, but you better have most of them. Family, friends, career, educational goals, plans for, you know, time outside of work, attention to your mental and physical health, etc. You know, that's what life is about. And if you don't have any of those things, well, then all you've got left is misery and suffering. So that's a bad deal for you. So once you set up that goal structure, let's say, and that's really in many ways that's what you should be doing at university. That's exactly what you should be doing, is trying to figure out who it is that you're trying to be, right? And you aim at that. And then you use everything you learned as a means of building that person that you want to be. And I really mean want to be. I don't mean should be, even those things are going to overlap. And it's important to distinguish between those, because that's partly, and this is back down to the micro routine analysis. So as I was saying, well, you're going to try to make yourself more industrious. Okay, number one, specify your damn goals, because how are you going to hit something if you don't know what it is? That isn't going to happen. And often people won't specify their goals too, because they don't like to specify conditions for failure. So if you keep yourself all vague and foggy, which is real easy, because that's just a matter of not doing as well, then you don't know when you fail. And people might say, well, I really don't want to know when I fail because that's painful. So I'll keep myself blind about when I fail. That's fine, except you'll fail all the time then. You just won't know it until you've failed so badly that you're done. And that can easily happen by the time you're 40. So I would recommend that you don't let that happen. So that's willful blindness, right? You could have known, but you chose not to. Okay, so once you get your goal structure set up, you think, okay, if I could have this life, looks like that might be worth living, despite the fact that it's going to be, you know, anxiety provoking and threatening, and there's going to be some suffering and loss involved and all of that. Obviously, the goal is to have a vision for your life such that, all things considered, that justifies your effort. You don't have to necessarily have done anything wrong for things to get completely out of control. It's a terrifying doctrine, but it's not a hopeless doctrine, because it still says that there's a way forward, there's a pathway forward, and the pathway forward is to adopt a mode of being that has some nobility, so that you can tolerate yourself and perhaps even have some respect for yourself as someone who's capable of standing up in the face of that terrible vulnerability and suffering, and that the pathway forward, as far as the existentialists are concerned, is by, well, certainly by the avoidance of deceit, particularly in language, but also by the adoption of responsibility for the conditions of existence and some attempt on your part to actually rectify them. And the thing that's so interesting about that is, well, two, as far as I'm concerned, and some of this is from clinical experience, you know, if you take people, and I've told you this, and you expose them voluntarily to things that they are avoiding and are afraid of, you know, that they know they need to overcome in order to meet their goals, their self-defined goals. If you can teach people to stand up in the face of the things they're afraid of, they get stronger. And you don't know what the upper limits to that are, because you might ask yourself, like, if for 10 years, if you didn't avoid doing what you knew you needed to do, by your own definitions, right, within the value structure that you've created, to the degree that you've done that, what would you be like? Well, you know, there are remarkable people who come into the world from time to time, and there are people who do find out over decades-long periods what they could be like if they were who they were, if they spoke their being forward. And they get stronger and stronger and stronger, and we don't know the limits to that. We do not know the limits to that. And so you could say, well, in part, perhaps the reason that you're suffering unbearably can be left at your feet, because you're not everything you could be, and you know it. And of course, that's a terrible thing to admit, and it's a terrible thing to consider, but there's real promise in it, right? Because it means that perhaps there's another way that you could look at the world, and another way that you could act in the world, so what it would reflect back to you would be much better than what it reflects back to you now. My experience is with people that we're probably running at about 51% of our capacity. I mean, you can think about this yourselves. I often ask undergraduates how many hours a day you waste, or how many hours a week you waste, and the classic answer is something like 4 to 6 hours a day. You know, inefficient studying, watching things on YouTube that not only do you not want to watch, that you don't even care about, that make you feel horrible about watching after you're done. That's probably 4 hours right there. You know, you think, well, that's 25 hours a week, it's 100 hours a month, that's 2.5 full work weeks, it's half a year of work weeks per year. And if your time is worth $20 an hour, which is a radical underestimate, it's probably more like 50 if you think about it in terms of deferred wages. If you're wasting 20 hours a week, you're wasting $50,000 a year. And you are doing that right now. And it's because you're young, wasting $50,000 a year is a way bigger catastrophe than it would be for me to waste it, because I'm not going to last nearly as long. And so if your life isn't everything it could be, you could ask yourself, well, what would happen if you just stopped wasting the opportunities that are in front of you? You'd be, who knows how much more efficient? 10 times more efficient. 20 times more efficient. That's the Pareto distribution. You have no idea how efficient people get. It's off the charts. Well, and if we all got our act together collectively and stopped making things worse, because that's another thing people do all the time, not only do they not do what they should to make things better, they actively attempt to make things worse because they're spiteful or resentful or arrogant or deceitful or homicidal or genocidal or all of those things all bundled together in an absolutely pathological package. If people stopped really trying just to make things worse, we have no idea how much better they would get just because of that. So there's this weird dynamic that's part of the existential system of ideas between human vulnerability, social judgment, both of which are major causes of suffering, and the failure of individuals to adopt the responsibility that they know they should adopt. It isn't merely that your fate depends on whether or not you get your act together and to what degree you decide that you're going to live out your own genuine being. It isn't only your fate, it's the fate of everyone that you're networked with. And so, you think, well, there's 7 billion people in the world. We're going to peak at about 9 billion, by the way, and then it'll decline rapidly, but 7 billion people in the world, and who are you? You're just one little dust mote among that 7 billion, and so it really doesn't matter what you do or don't do, but that's simply not the case. It's the wrong model, because you're at the center of a network. You're a node in a network. Of course, that's even more true now that we have social media. You'll know 1,000 people, at least over the course of your life, and they'll know 1,000 people each, and that puts you one person away from 1 million, and 2 persons away from 1 billion. And so that's how you're connected, and the things you do, they're like dropping a stone in a pond. The ripples move outward, and they affect things in ways that you can't fully comprehend, and it means that the things that you do and that you don't do are far more important than you think. And so if you act that way, of course, the terror of realizing that is that it actually starts to matter what you do, and you might say, well, that's better than living a meaningless existence. It's better for it to matter. But I mean, if you really asked yourself, would you be so sure if you had the choice? I can live with no responsibility whatsoever. The price I pay is that nothing matters. Or I can reverse it and everything matters. But I have to take the responsibility that's associated with that. It's not so obvious to me that people would take the meaningful path. When you say, well, nihilists suffer dreadfully because there's no meaning in their life and they still suffer. Yeah, but the advantage is they have no responsibility. So that's the payoff, and I actually think that's the motivation. Say, well, I can't help being nihilistic. All my belief systems have collapsed. It's like, yeah, maybe you've just allowed them to collapse because it's a hell of a lot easier than acting them out. And the price you pay is some meaningless suffering, but you can always whine about that and people will feel sorry for you, and you have the option of taking the pathway of the martyr, so that's a pretty good deal, all things considered, especially when the alternative is to bear your burden properly and to live forthrightly in the world. Well, what Solzhenitsyn figured out, and so many people in the 20th century, it's not just him, even though he's the best example, is that if you live a pathological life, you pathologize your society. And if enough people do that, then it's hell. Really. And you can read the Gulag Archipelago if you have the fortitude to do that, and you'll see exactly what hell is like. And then you can decide if that's a place you'd like to visit, or even more importantly, if it's a place you'd like to visit and take all your family and friends, because that's what happened in the 20th century. So what did I learn from studying the terrible situation that obtained in the mid-1980s when the Soviets and the West had tens of thousands of hydrogen bombs pointed at each other, ready to go at a moment's notice? Why did that happen? What did I learn? It was simple. The reason that situation existed was because I was not good enough. I was not good enough. The reason that the terrible situations in the world exist now is because you're not good enough. You're not good enough. You're not good enough. We can solve any problem. We can solve any problem. If we used all the resources that were available to us, if we live properly, we have no idea what we could turn what we're in into. So I would say, you support free speech because it's It's the mechanism that maintains the sanity of the individual and society. And you live in relationship with the spoken truth to the best of your ability, because the alternative is hell. And if hell is what you want, then you can remain arrogant and resentful and deceitful. But if you want to work to better the world, to bring it up to what it might be, then you speak forthrightly, you clarify yourself, and you act properly in the world. And then you see what happens. And this is the final thing I'll say. I spent a long time studying the Sermon on the Mount. It's a key document. It's Christ's commentary on the Ten Commandments. In a sense, the question being, if you codify the rules by which a society might function, is there something within the structure of the rules that rises above them that acts as the fundamental principle from which they're all derived? It's the ultimate question of human ethics. What is the highest principle? And the answer that's put forth in the Sermon on the Mount is quite straightforward. Aim at the highest possible good that you can conceive of. Whatever that is that you can conceive of, that serves as your God for all intents and purposes. Having aligned yourself with that good, speak the truth and see what happens. That's the act of faith. The act of faith is whatever the truth reveals is the best of all possible worlds, regardless of how it appears to you now. It's a guess, right? It's something you stake a bet on. Well, what do you think? The best of all possible worlds will be brought into being by deceit? It seems unlikely. You know that doesn't work in your own life. You tangle yourself up in your own lies, right? One lie breeds 10, and 10 breeds 100, and maybe you put the consequences on down the road and you don't fall into the pit for 5 or 6 years. Maybe you've even forgotten why you fell in when you finally do fall in, but everyone knows that you don't get away with anything. And so the issue is, well, what would happen if you just said what you thought? Stupid as it is, inaccurate as it is, and listen to people, criticize you in response to shape you and make you more articulate. What would your life be like? And the answer to that is, and I know this to be true, I've worked with many, many people on precisely this problem. Your life gets better and better and better and richer and deeper, but that comes with a heavier and heavier burden of responsibility. Well, that's okay. You use the observation of your own capability to bear responsibility, to buttress yourself against the terrors of being finite. You say, weak and miserable as I am, I can still stand up to the terrible tragedy of life and prevail. And that's good enough.